Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
If you've ever had any of these questions, this is a great podcast for you. What is product marketing? And why is it different from regular marketing? How do you market a product for single versus multi-product companies? What happens if your product is ugly and nobody wants to say it? Get the answers to these questions and many more.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the show today. We have Yasmeen Turayhi, founder of Mult-product, which is a product marketing and consulting agency, author of at least 3 books that I know of, one of which is a big part of our conversation today, called Product Marketing Debunked. You've been a TEDx speaker, and you've got a product marketer's guide to the launch. There's like a course that you've got. I mean, there's a lot of cool things that you've done. So really excited to have you here, Yasmeen.
Oh, thank you so much, Marc. I'm really excited to be here too.
Cool. So for us, like V and I talk about this a lot, like there's fundamentals in marketing. 4 Ps is one of those things in marketing, and product is one of those 4 Ps. And yet we really haven't talked a lot about product. So that's part of the reason why we wanted to really have you on here, because it's such an important component of just business and marketing in general. So we're really excited to get into this with you. One of the challenges though that we do often come up with is there's a lot of terminology, and I know you've talked about this in your book, for some of the same things, but they're just phrased a little bit differently, or maybe it's because a marketer's creativity streak. People want to create new things out of the same things, and so product marketing feels to me like it's in that kind of space. So before we even get too far, can you just maybe set us straight? What is product marketing?
Yeah, great question. Great question, Marc. So, I think there's so much confusion around the word product marketing, because it's kind of a misnomer. It's like a mix of product management, operations, sales, and marketing. And so I think a lot of times, like, people will ask, isn't product marketing just marketing? And it really is not. It's a mix of a lot of different skill sets. And it was really created to be of service for companies that had products that they needed to market and bring commercialize into the world. Right. And so a lot of times marketing focuses on more like top of funnel activities, right? Like social media, SEO, putting a lot of brand awareness out into the world. But product marketing gets a little bit more granular and specific, focusing on mid-funnel, later funnel marketing activities. So that's really how product marketing kind of started, and especially started in tech. And I believe in ad tech was one of the first use cases of product marketing, and specifically commercialization, because in tech, you're always launching new feature sets, right? Like sometimes there were some companies that I worked with where we were launching like a couple features, or you can call them products, every single day, right? And so as a result, there's no way that even people internally understood how to position them, market them. So we needed a lot of structure to kind of to be put in place for everyone to understand how we were going to launch this thing, how is it going to meet the market needs and demands. And I also think like one thing I've noticed is a lot of engineering teams or product teams think that something is ready just because it's engineering ready, but it's really not ready until it's commercially ready. And that's what a product marketer's job is. So product marketer's role really is to ensure that the right product gets to the right customer at the right time.
Okay. V, you want to?
I'm feverishly taking notes.
Okay. I can go on and on, but okay.
No, because I think this is where, again, and I'm happy to share this as well. Marc and I are also in a transitionary state in our career where we're looking for work. So we see a lot of these job postings that are either, asking for product marketers, and we're reading the job descriptions like, well, this does feel like marketing. Not sure if, the label is also different. So understanding that, when you think about it from a product perspective, to say, there's a lot of iterations, there's a lot of motion constantly, and you're focusing more on the mid funnel and later funnel, or bottom of the funnel, if you will. And being able to be very, nimble in that is kind of what the product marketers focus as they're constantly working with the product development probably team there, make sure that they are getting all the new features right and make sure they're marketing them to the right customers. So no, it's interesting to have that delineation between, what traditional marketing may look like and what product marketing does. So thank you for sharing. When we're thinking about the common types of business orientation, think about, your sales, your product, your, even the different departments. I think one question that really comes to light is, what are the nuances that a product marketer has to constantly, deal with, if you will, with all the other internal stakeholders versus maybe what your perception would be from a traditional marketer? Is there a lot of different, stakeholders in that context?
Oh yeah, definitely. So product marketers, I jokingly say with a lot of other product marketing leads in the industry that we need like our therapy support group, because we're sort of responsible for everything. We're kind of like, we're focusing on sales, we're focusing on operations, we're focusing on marketing, and there's so much responsibility. I think a big piece of it is like making sure that everyone is also aligned and moving in the same direction, because that is something that I think a lot of companies, like the kiss of death for a lot of companies, is poor communication and lack of streamlined efforts. So like if product is working towards one goal, marketing is working towards another. And one thing I've also found is like a traditional marketer, and definitely not trying to hate on them, but traditional marketers, right?
Oh, please do.
Okay. Okay, I will.
They love us.
But traditional marketers oftentimes haven't spent enough time understanding the technical nuances of a product. So that's where the lack of marketing assets it just doesn't happen usually when you have more traditional marketers or brand marketers working on product marketing. That level of expertise and nuance and sophistication and the awareness of how tech works, even from like an engineering mindset and from a product perspective, needs to be at the marketing table. And so, and frankly, most people don't really have both skill sets, right? Like most people are, much more like over indexed on the creative piece. Other people are much more indexed on more technical pieces, and we'll just do that. So it's the person who actually can speak in both worlds and has the language to understand both worlds and both people. But my loyalties are always going to be with the product manager and the person running the product development road cycle, because and also everything that I do from market research to positioning to go to market is always going to be in service of the product and the customer. Because that, especially when you're a product company, when you just have one product, right? You're really a product company. There's no other product to offer. So that's when product marketing is exceptionally important. Now, as you grow and have other products and product suites and packages, then the more traditional marketing, it can be helpful and more important, especially from top of funnel. I mean, that's always important. But as you get more nuance, and then also as you start to package things with different feature sets and to exploring ways that they can be complementary, I mean, those things you have to have a very strong understanding of the technical piece, as much so as a product manager. Right. And so in some cases, that's just, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of attention to detail. And it's, it can be fun, it can be not fun. And the last thing I'll say too, is that I've worked in B2B and B2C, and that experience is also going to be very different, whether you're working in B2B versus B2C.
Because of the sales funnel, or the sales force, I should say.
Yes, the sales force, the type of customer that you're going to be interacting with, the type of market research you're going to be able to do, the type of marketing you'll be able to do, right? Like that there's a whole kind of different strategy with some overlap, of course, but yeah.
My mind is spinning a little bit because I feel like there's a lot of overlap between what you described as a product marketer, and in previous conversations we would say like you mentioned like mid-lower funnel. So like short-term feature benefit marketing versus long-term brand building, brand awareness, the top of funnel part you were talking about. And so there's like the difference there in skill set. And generally speaking, it works best when they work together.
Yes.
And I think they generally are good at integrating with one another, because in most markets, you've got like 5% of the market is making a decision today. And so if you're running ads and promotions and whatnot, and releasing features and stuff like that, releasing features is probably only going to matter to the people who actually have the product for the most part. But advertising feature benefit is only going to reach and resonate with 5% of the market. So then you do need brand awareness and the creative higher level stuff to get anybody's attention for the product that you have. So is there a relationship that you've seen that works well for the product marketers focusing on mid-lower funnel with the brand strategist or the brand team working on upper funnel?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Yeah. So we definitely need brand marketing at a certain point. And I say this because I've seen kind of like the range of working with super early stage startups all the way through like Series B, Series C, IPO, public. So I've seen the gamut of, marketing needs, and having a brand awareness is really important beyond, I would say Series A is when there should be an investment in that. But when it's really early, that's when you can actually kind of
you don't have to.
Yeah, you can be more of a generalist and just focus on the product piece.
I mean, you could have just sales teams doing it for the beginning part, probably too, right?
Yeah.
Other than like you need the material for them to work on.
Right. Exactly. And also if they know how to tell stories and if they know how to engage with customers and those types of things. But yeah, so you definitely need both. In my experience, I've worked really well with creative directors, head of marketing or CMOs who have a very high understanding of brand awareness. So they are really focused on top of funnel. Now, the piece though that is where I think we differ is the market research piece, because they're going to be looking maybe more for signals from a marketing perspective, from a top of funnel marketing perspective, where product manager is going to be looking for things from a feature, from a product perspective. And so in my experience, running research where you're combining both is actually optimal. You're not like, you're not doing one or the other. You're really getting both types of insights. You're listening for like the words people are using when they're talking about your product, but you're quantifying their experience. You're getting really clear about the product, the feature set, the value proposition, the pain point,
return,
all those things. Yeah. So those are the two distinctions. And then when I'm working with the really early stage companies, again, they don't have the resources to invest in both. So
no, that makes sense. And there's enough like for them to capture a percentage or whatever of that 5% who are in market today. That's enough,
right?
But if you've got a fairly decent customer base already to grow, then that's where the brand really kicks in.
Right. And again, I think the distinction also is like if you are a single product company versus a multi-product company. Because if you're just a single product company, there's a lot you could do as a product marketer to get the brand to an elevated position in the market without investing in like, a lot when it comes to brand marketing, because you're a product company at that point. And that's what people know you as.
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm fascinated by this, and I'd love to dig in a little bit into more of like the process from a go-to-market perspective, if you could entertain this. So, when you think about like the life cycle stage of the product, so early, mid, mature, what is the role of the marketer's responsibilities in either each of those phases, or how do you see the role adapting and changing over the course of the life cycle of the product?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would actually take a step back and, assess like where is the company in its like stage of evolution, right? Like what's going on with, is it an early stage company, Series A company? Are they a public company? And just getting a little bit more clear around that. Now, when you say like the life cycle stages of the product, it's really fascinating in my experience. I've worked with like hundreds. I've consulted a couple hundred startups, like either advised or consulted or worked with different accelerators all over the world. So I've had a lot of exposure to different types of products and teams and that kind of thing. And it's really interesting when it comes to like the product life cycle. I think it's really important to do a ton of market research, and this is something I would say 95% of companies do not do well. And I don't have the data to necessarily prove that, but you can actually check out Patrick Campbell, who runs Price Intelligently, because he did some analysis on this where companies were saying, oh, we understand our customer, we understand what they want. And then it would be like in somebody's head, right? So that's really, for me, my first question. Oh, go ahead.
No, it just there's keep going. There's this study that came out from the Better Brief Project, and to validate what you're saying, marketers think they're fucking awesome at building a brief,
right?
And then they hand it over to the whoever's getting it, the creative agency or the business or whatever, and they go, not so much. And it's like a 90-10 thing. There's a massive gap between what they believe is great, and I think a lot of that comes to what your point is, which is a lack of understanding of the market and their needs, and their journey and where they're at in their journey. And so aligning the message delivery, to your point, at the right time, as opposed to just anytime, all the time.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think what I have kind of observed is that a lot of people don't really understand their customer. And if they say that they do, they're I think they're just not aware. It's not a lot of self-awareness, because you have to be so cognizant of how you project onto people, and have done your own kind of layer of personal development work to be able to see people truly objectively and to get information. Because I would always do these studies with a product manager or like some other colleague, and we would exchange notes. And I'm like, wow, we're totally listening at a very different market research conversation. I mean, it's really wild, actually, that we could hear so many, different pieces of feedback. And I'm also listening for what people are not saying, you know, and so I spent 2 years studying intuition. So I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, because I really wanted to understand like what is like both like the physical kind of and emotional intuitive signals, that people are using when it comes to their explanations of their inner world and how they're perceiving. Yeah. And I think also since COVID, I've noticed that customer sentiment has changed drastically. And because there's so much more input and information coming in, people's preferences has changed because of the way we work. Especially from a B2C perspective, just so having like a continual pulse of the market, it's something that I would say most companies don't want to invest in. And I just go through this exercise all the time because I work with a lot of different CEOs. They're like, no, we've already done this research. We're good. And I'm like,
totally.
Don't do it.
I've heard that so often. Yeah. I'm with you.
And also to their point, I think a lot of market research that's been done hasn't been done well, or if it's been done well, hasn't been implemented. And so I think that's why it's a huge waste of time for a lot of companies, because like they don't actually know how to take action on those insights. Like you really need a person who understands tech, or if you're working in tech, product, marketing, and customers, and that's a very nuanced skill set to have, but it's so informative. And I would say time and time again, whenever I've talked to startups that have not, gone well, which 95% of startups fail, the big piece was like, we spent so much time building our product. We didn't understand our customer. And also they would, even doing a one-time market research study is not enough. You have to build like customer advisory boards. Like, it's really, you're in service of the customer. That's all totally. It comes down to.
I find, like, as you're saying that, there's that line, I think it was Kevin Kelly that said this originally, but it's something like change happens slowly, then all at once.
Yeah.
And to me, that kind of speaks to what you're saying, which is like, unless you have a finger on the pulse and you're regularly checking the pulse of the market at whatever, quarterly, biannual intervals, even annual intervals, then you get caught in that. Oh, the market changed all of a sudden. It was overnight. And like, no, it's been changing the whole time. It will always change.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I wanted to add there, Yasmeen, as you were kind of articulating, some of the reasons, not really the reasons, but when you think about why CEOs are just abreast, say, hey, no, we're good there. Sometimes that information is old as well, right? They haven't gone back to double check. Like Marc said, if you're lucky, maybe you can get an annual pulse, but a lot of organizations, at least the ones that I've worked with, you don't see that happening even at that annual basis. So then you're kind of thinking that the consumer hasn't changed and we're still targeting the same audience. This is the feature set that they're still looking for. But lo and behold, all of a sudden, another competitor comes out of nowhere, blindsides you, and you're like, what happened? It's like, well, it was already in the data, or you should have refreshed that a lot more.
Totally. And it's so interesting because like, even if we look at ourselves, I'm like, wow, who I was a year ago is so different than who I am today.
Man.
Right. So why would I have the same preferences? Like what I'm buying is different. So of course, people are constantly changing. And I think it's, there's a level of humility, I think that that CEOs and founders need to have when it comes to building their product. And so honestly, after all this this work in the world of product marketing, I kind of go back to someone's level of their inner world and their emotional development, because that really does have an impact on the longevity of a company. And so even though it's a skill set that people don't necessarily talk about or even develop or invest in, it is one of the most critical skill sets when it comes to, I think, being a leader for the long term and growing a team that really wants to stick it out with you. So that's where I see an underdeveloped kind of characteristic. At least like the old paradigm or the old game is no longer working, in my opinion. And, to your points, both of your points, the external world, our customers' sentiments, there's a lagging indicator. It's a lagging indicator, right? So yeah, it's like we don't actually know.
So you're always playing catch up.
So you're always playing catch up. Exactly.
Even with the most up-to-date information.
Exactly. So you kind of have to be a little bit, a couple steps ahead at all times. And then also just having the self-awareness that like, this is outdated now and we're going to have to stay on it.
So in terms of like in your book, you've outlined market validation, framing the message, and delivering the message as three sort of major components of the go-to-market process. And so research fits into the first step, which is the market validation. We talked a little bit about outdated information being an issue and the lag of that information, even when it is up to date, and how relevant it is, because you're always reporting on the past. It's never the future that you've got. So in terms of like other mistakes that people they make, is there any like major ones that you would say are important to consider?
Oh my gosh, so many. Like, where do I begin?
Well,
I think just not having a go-to-market process or plan is something I see pretty frequently, that most companies will just say, oh, someone is taking care of it, not assigning a revenue owner to a product launch so that there's one person who is responsible for the financial success of a product, not having executive buy-in early when it comes to understanding how we're going to launch something. And then, that knowing that the launch is an ongoing effort, it's not a one-day event, that there needs to be pre-launch, post-launch kind of marketing strategies. And I think also slower is faster in some cases. And there's also just like nuances with like different verticals and industries, like health tech and fintech, much less forgiving than other industries where you can do a little bit more, testing and early access. But when it comes to certain industries, you don't have as many chances with customers. So that's what, and then also regulatory risk, I would say, is big. Not understanding pricing models. And then not understanding, I think what I find so interesting is a lot of companies in the B2B space, I think, really don't understand marketing at all. Like it's just, and there's such a privilege towards sales over marketing. And so because of the sales cycle, of course, it makes sense, right? Like you have to have, it's a much longer sales cycle. You have to be able to tell a story in like a very specific sequence. And I find that that's really where there's a disconnection that happens, like the marketing point of view. And then also becoming once a marketer or product marketer starts to become reactionary and sort of playing defense, as a marketer, it's over, like game over. You're never going to be successful long term.
Yeah. I have so many
You wanted
flashbacks and like you hit
I'm
so many
seeing Mark
nerves
there.
like
Yeah.
it's starting to twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's such a fascinating so a lot of that though is dependent on just it's part of the market validation. I mean, some of it gets executed through framing the message, delivering message, but so much of that is like upfront work that just has to be done beforehand in order to ensure a smooth launch, especially in those markets where there's less forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly.
Or sectors or industries, depending on what you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also community, like building community is huge. So that's also a place where you can get, customer sentiments, build a community on Discord if you can, or Signal or whatever Meta. I mean, just building community and investing in that community has massive rewards. And I think just getting what I've noticed from just most of the community pulses I've been connecting with is they often say, we want to hear more from what people are doing with their product vision and, what the leadership is thinking. Cause like, that's what people really want when they're like buying into a product or a company. They want to be part of a movement. We don't want customers. We want advocates. We want fans. We want people to love us, like that heart love, not that mind love. Oh, functional. Right. And that does requires like a lot of kind of generosity of spirit when building the product and always remembering, the hero's journey is such a great metaphor for this, but that the customer is always the hero in the hero's journey. And that as a company, you're really there to be a mentor and a guide. And if you really,
like
really
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I wanted to take you back if we could just, you mentioned something that really stuck out to me just around some of the mistakes that are constantly being made. And I didn't expect this one. You said like executive buy-in. I would have assumed, as you're kind of going through this process, startups, doesn't matter what series you're in, that leadership is really abreast in a lot of the, either they go to market or they're heavily invested in the day-to-day side. So do you mind unpacking that? What is it that you're seeing there that is creating potentially that disconnect between leadership and essentially the individuals that are executing against a vision?
Yeah. Great question. Well, I find that like as companies kind of grow and as, a lot of competing interests play out, that the leadership team doesn't have as much time to communicate about what they're doing, what the long-term vision is, or maybe they haven't really solidified their long-term vision. And the vision has to be 10 times bigger than what they think it is, because otherwise you're going to start reacting to kind of the day-to-day stuff. And once you start reacting, that's always like, again, the kiss of death. It's like, we have to be intentional about all of our days. So that's what I've noticed when and especially with remote work right now, I think that communication has to be so intentional because people are not having these casual conversations, at the water cooler anymore. They're not having it in person. They're not having it over lunches. So we have to be extra diligent about the go-to-market process. And like I usually build out like Slack channels just for go-to-market, weekly meetings, sprints, check-ins, over communicate. And sometimes I'll do like a weekly recap. Like, here's what's going on. Here's what we need help in. Here's like, and I would associate everything with a color. So like green, yellow, red, but I would also spend a lot of time with all the disparate teams to get really clear about, well, what's going on right now that is going to be a potential bottleneck to this shared vision. And you'd be surprised, honestly, if you actually did due diligence and asked, especially bigger companies, like, what's the long-term vision? Most people are like, we have no idea, especially most, I'd say middle manager, employees. Most people. And so how do you show up in service to this longer mission if you don't know what it is?
Yeah, fair point.
That's a great point.
On the flip side of that question, there's also the other idea where you have 100% executive buy-in, but everyone else thinks the baby's ugly.
Right.
So how do you?
Yeah.
So how do you like if you're the product marketer?
Right.
And you uncover stuff through your market research, but now you're the messenger that's about to get shot. Like, how do you manage that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Wow.
So I have actually been in that situation. I'd say maybe a couple times. So it doesn't happen very often, but or like there could be a redirect, right? But a total like we should not proceed with this launch at all or anything adjacent to it. That has happened a couple times in my career. I think, I will say when I handled it, I was probably certainly not as sophisticated as I am now when it comes to interpersonal communication and diplomacy and how to work with people. So I was sort of a bulldozer and I was like, this is not going to work. And I'll tell you all the reasons why. And, had done a lot of customer research. So when you do customer research, you can quantify a lot of the feedback by asking this question on a scale of 1 to 5. How likely would you to proceed with this situation, whatever it is, right? 5 being high, 1 being low. And if people are giving anything less than a 3, you're kind of screwed, right? Especially when it comes to like a pain point or a problem that you're solving or the price. And there was 2 times where when I did this research, I kept, and I also intuitively felt, I was like, it doesn't seem like that big of a pain point. So the bigger the pain point, the bigger the value proposition. If you don't have a big pain point that you're solving for, you're just not going to have a big, it's not going to go down well. So it was interesting, when I did this customer research, I had to say to the executive, I said, I know that all these product managers are working on this, but this is going to be a huge waste of money for the company. And I think I also said, as a product marketer, I don't want to put my name on it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's true. It's reputational risk, right? I'm like, I do not want to sign up. I would say that most of my career, I do not like to take on projects that I know are not going to go down well. I've done that once. I was like, let me see what I could do, even though all the signals are not pointing, in a great direction. Right. So, it's definitely reputational risk. And so that should be also a signal for a CEO or executive team. Wow. Like the product marketer, and I wish more product marketers did that. It's like, no, I don't want to be associated with this. Like, this is not what I agree with. It's not going to go well. And so that's what I've also, another kind of red flag or warning sign is when a CEO says, oh, we've hired like 10 marketers or 10 product marketers, and they all didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know marketing well. And I'm like, do you know marketing well? So that's kind of an interesting red flag. Also checking like Glassdoor reviews. But I would just say, as a product marketer, you never want to be in the business of having to prove yourself. Like if a person doesn't so I don't take clients where someone's like finds me and is like, hey, tell me what you're going to do for me. I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like you should know my value if you've done the research. And if you haven't done the research, then like that's going to be such a high expenditure of my time having to train you on what a product marketer does. And that's not a good use of my time. Nor is it a good use of your time, at the rate that I'm charging. So it's just like, you got to do the due diligence if you want to hire the right people.
Yeah. There's a comment you made about the pain point not being big enough. And then if it's not big enough, the product itself might not be able to work as effectively or have the market acceptance because you're trying to jam a square peg into a round hole kind of thing. On that note, transitioning a little bit into positioning, how important is it for a product to be totally differentiated? It's an ongoing conversation V and I have, as opposed to and I think in your book you had a picture of I forget what software systems sector it was, but like we've all seen these pictures of like say CRM systems. There's a million CRM systems or email service providers or whatever, social media networks. There's so many tools out there. Right. And so how realistic is it to build something completely differentiated? And is it necessary to compete versus do you just need to be distinctive and have a slightly different spin on how you go to market or how you service?
Yeah. This is such an interesting question. And I don't think that there's a straight answer for this. Like, I think it really actually depends on the industry, the stage that the company's at, what the type of competition is, right? And is it in a new market? Is it in an old market? And so that's like where I'm going to kind of start the conversation is like, what's the context first? I think when it comes to positioning, I mean, frankly, I'm so bored by all these traditional positioning models. I probably wouldn't even use, I would use the traditional ones definitely as a starting point, because I think that helps with clarity. Like you, and most people will have like decisiveness, but like lack of clarity, you know, like running in a direction that like makes no sense or, right. And so getting clear is fundamental to this whole process of telling your story. So I think the traditional positioning statements work. Now there's some that obviously start with, looking at different competitors and different alternatives in the market, and then trying to understand how you fit in compared to what's happening in the market today, which is good because it's like signaling to a customer, there's a reference point, and here's how I'm going to talk about this in relationship to a reference point. Great. I could go on and on about the different models, but the hero's journey for me is something that I really like, because I like the way that the story is told with the perspective of the customer, and then getting clear on who your hero is, right? And how you're going to be in service of the hero's journey. So that's really what has worked well, in my career, is kind of doing a mix, doing all of them and just kind of seeing where things land with customers, testing with customers. The differentiation piece is huge, right? But is oftentimes like you're not going to know how customers are perceiving you for a while. And so that's also why the market research piece is important. It's like, well, how are they actually talking about you in their mind? What is their inner dialogue? Like, why did they decide to choose you? So you could do a mix of things like the Steve Jobs model, which is like, I'm going to have a clear direction about this innovative, technology in the story. And then you're also getting, market feedback from the market. So you're kind of combining the two. But yeah, it's kind of a mix of art and science. Like, I don't think that there's one clear answer for every scenario on this. And I also think, starting with education is key too. Like, you really want to educate your customers, give them as much information to be helpful as possible. Like, I always start with that question, like, what would I want if I was a customer of this? Like, how would I want to be interacting with this company or product? That's the level of kind of empathy and compassion that we want to have when it comes to messaging our customers. And I also want to say, what's interesting is if you look at the funnel, you can actually, look at it vertically, and then you could flip it horizontally and look at it horizontally, right? And
over time.
And two things happen when a customer is not, there's two reasons why a customer wouldn't proceed in the funnel. One is it a communication issue? Is it a marketing story issue? Do they not understand the onboarding, all that kind of stuff? The other piece is like, is it a product issue? Like, is the feature set actually not rich enough for them? And I find that level of nuance, teams are often blaming each other. It's like, well, it's a marketing problem. We need better marketers. Oh no, like the product. But the thing is, at least in my observation, at least when I was working in Silicon Valley and in the tech world, is that we privilege the product managers and the engineers over the marketers almost 9 times out of 10. And I understand why, right? Because they're the ones kind of building working on the technical part. But that privilege needs to be reduced to neutral.
This generally when I'm thinking about product marketing in totality, and now the conversation around positioning, you coming into a startup, there is this position, we have an idea of where it is that we're going, etc. What happens though if you're a marketer going into an already established product, but now a repositioning exercise needs to happen? What does that look like? Can it be done? It won't be easy, obviously, but have you come across something like that before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So getting buy-in is really the first piece to doing a repositioning exercise. And then also understanding well, what is the sort of end goal for this? Is it because we want better adoption? And again, I think going in blind is never a good strategy, right? Because I could have a hypothesis about the story. I've done a lot of storytelling. So like, I've done film and podcast journalism, but a lot of people, I would say, only do marketing and not storytelling, right? And so I think understanding the culture that you're walking into is everything. Is it a product-led company like Facebook? Is it an engineering-led company like Google? Is it a marketing-led company like Apple, right? And so getting the context of like, well, how do these people, how does leadership orient themselves around storytelling? Do they start with the technical? Do they start with the vision? And so I've tried to shift people more into like the Apple style when they just weren't Apple, you know what I mean? Like that just wasn't their vibe, and it does not go down well. So I like, if you're a product marketer and you are brought in, I would say start with the context of the leadership team. It's much more difficult to change that culture than to implement something within their kind of context and guidelines. So let's say they're product led, right? Doing the repositioning exercise, when I do market research, which I often would do if I'm allowed to, you know, if they want to take that on, is I would focus more on the product story, like getting clarity around like, well, how are people talking about the product and how it's helping them? And then going through a repositioning exercise, getting buy-in, getting feedback. Now, it's not it's not a science. It's kind of a mix of art and science. And I think also testing that with beta customers or testing that with customer advisory boards, so that you're not just shooting in the dark, right? Like you're really getting valuable insights. Talking to sales teams and then talking to product teams gives you a lot of information about, and it's oftentimes like in very different polarities, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
So it's cool to just, I do like due diligence kind of deep dives with all different teams to get their vision. And then I usually like will pick the person I trust the most. Just joking. I mean, I will say, like, I think when someone is sharing their perspective about a customer, knowing the filter that they are sharing it from is also fascinating, right? It's like, well, how self-aware is this person, you know, within themselves? You know, what are they, you know, so doing that assessment,
that's a great point.
Yeah. It's like, well, if this person's not really self-aware about their life, I'm not going to trust a lot of information coming from their mouth, you know, or like,
fair.
So
that's a fair point.
In terms of like, sorry, how much time have we got? About 5 minutes left or so. Maybe we can do one more question. So, differentiation aside, or maybe two more if we can squeeze it in. But if you have time, but differentiation aside, like how do you craft a positioning statement if you're going to go to market? Like I'm familiar with the 3 C's, like where it's, you know, what's in the value wedge idea, where you've got, here's your customers and what they care about. Here's the competition, what they're good at. Here's your company and what you can do uniquely. And you're trying to find something that is defensible against competition, unique to you and valuable to the customer. But is that a thing from a product marketing perspective, or is there a better way that you've had to be able to craft these stories that are different or at least unique in terms of communicating value?
I would say ask ChatGPT. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I feel, you know,
I'll pop up a window right now.
Yeah, it's like, what does ChatGPT think about this? I mean, but it's interesting. Actually, that's a good maybe point, right? Like I have asked ChatGPT a lot of questions about positioning, right? And it's been super fascinating.
Me too.
Yeah, and I'm sure that and I've been testing it with different audiences, but this is the thing. Like you could start with a lot of different types of models, right? I've probably played around with most of them, but I still, I again go back to the hero's journey, which is, you know, the Joseph Campbell kind of circular model where it's like, who's the hero? What is the problem that they're facing, the conflict? How do they overcome it? Who's the mentor? How do they, you know, transform, right? It's really about someone's transformation. And then how can they integrate that back into their life and become a fan and an advocate? So that's like the sort of journey that I like to go on when it comes to storytelling. And again, that's very different when it comes to B2B. I probably wouldn't do that for B2B. I'd probably do that more for B2C. But I would say, you know, it's sort of a mix of art and science. Like you really just have to go back to customers. Now, when I create my storytelling, I actually do probably 80% due diligence, where I'm just listening, I'm just collecting feedback, I'm looking at the
Mm-hmm.
market, I'm looking at competitors, I'm seeing how the ecosystem is thinking, and and then I'll sit down and it'll just come to me like, okay, like here's, and there's the framework, which is like, what is this product about? How does it work? Why are we doing this? What are the pain points? And I think that this is the key here, is that most people don't speak about the solutions in response to the pain points, right? It's like, these are the 3 clear pain points, and then these are the 3 clear solutions that we offer. That's it. It's like, that's it. We don't overcomplicate it. It doesn't have to be like 10 pain points, it's just like, what are the top 3 if we were to put it on a scale? Because I think if you go to like most websites, like people just overcomplicate their messaging, and especially at a top of funnel perspective, it's like people don't understand what it is that we're offering. And this is something that I think is really key internally, is that we spend so much time within our company or talking about our product that we can't zoom out and see it for what it is. We're so blinded by it that, So the mom test, I think there's a book about that. It's called The Mom Test, where it's like, can you explain this to your mom? So that's actually a fun strategy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, totally.
My mom wouldn't understand. Still doesn't understand what I do.
Yeah. Mine.
It's okay.
Mine too. Are you Greek? Is that a Greek? Okay.
I am,
I am.
Yeah.
I understand. I think this is a funny short anecdote. My mom, back in the day, I worked in fintech, and one of the applications we were building was accepting crypto. And this was like way back in like 2015. So I'd read a lot of books about the industry, and my mom was like, "What is Bitcoin?" I was like, "Okay, I'm going to try to explain this." And I wrote an article. It was very, very, very easy to understand for my mom. She's immigrant, and English is not her first language. And it was so funny. That article, which I thought was very, very simplified, was the #1 hit on Google for many years. If you were to put, what is Bitcoin? It was like wild. Way. And my mom was like, I still don't understand.
Still don't understand.
I still don't understand. So
that's an incredible story. I love that.
V, go ahead.
Well, I think we're like close to time here, but I want to add just one quick thing here. When I think about the velocity some of these organizations are working at, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, how can as a product marketer, can you be better prepared for the velocity that you're just going to be hit with, and that constant change cycle that you're in?
Right. Such a great question. So I just actually finished teaching a class about this where, so true. I think things are just moving so fast, and there's so many competing interests within an organization, and especially when it comes to product marketing. So I always tell my product marketers, you set the stage for what you're going to work on with the executive team. So if there is, because what usually happens is we become the sort of like, we need this, we need that. All of a sudden, like the pile of work just starts to become untenable. And over time, your productivity, the quality of your work goes down because you can't actually handle that much output. And so what I tell people to do is, when I'm building a go-to-market tracker, I'll say to a leadership team, sponsor, executive, I'll say, number all these line items of all the things that we could do for the next 2-3 months, or even for the next year. Label these with a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very important, 1 being low importance. I'm going to do the same in this column. Now we're going to average it out, and we're only going to work on things that are a 4 and 5. Now, most executives are like, well, everything's a 5,
Everything's a 5.
Everything's a 5. And I'm like, no, half the list.
And everything's easy to implement.
No, I mean, this is also why getting very so I create themes in my tracker, and I get very granular. It's like recruit, customers for customer research churn study, build out the survey. It's not just like customer research. Like, no, these are all the sub points of all the action items that need to happen in order for this to happen. Right. So I get very granular, and then I'll say, these are all the things, and there's a sequential order, unless I'm able to clone myself. Right. There's a sequential order here, and this is what we're going to do. And if you do want to add things after we've confirmed this list, so I'll just say, like, we're going to only do 20 to 30% of this list. Is that's according to the
Mhm.
Pareto principle, right? Like there's probably some point where this much work is going to give us this much output. So we're just going to focus on that. I always tell them, like, it doesn't mean we're not going to do the rest of the stuff. We're just going to put this on pause for later in the year, right? So that helps them kind of calibrate. And then if they do add other work, I'll say, well, what would you like to take off this list? Because this is all I have bandwidth for.
Yeah.
Now that keeps everyone very honest and tight about the schedule. And honestly, if you're getting abused by your executive team and like they're making you do an obscene amount of work, I just think that that's not a long-term strategy, you know? Like I don't believe in like abusing people. And then also just like seeing, energy management is a whole other skill set too, right? Like people oftentimes manage their time, but not their energy. Right. And so there probably needs to be some kind of personal development piece on that.
Yeah.
I like
Yasmeen, I know you gotta go. So I really appreciate this. And, well, we both do, but this has been really fascinating. So thanks for joining us. How can people find out more about you?
Thank you so much. I just also wanted to say you two are amazing, amazing hosts. And I just had so much fun doing this interview. So I really appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
I really do.
Well, thanks.
Where you can find me, I am on LinkedIn. You could find me on Medium. I think I have like some YouTube channel it's an older YouTube channel with like interviews with other product marketers. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way to go. I'm revamping my website, but for now, and then you can also check out my books. I've got a ton of free resources for anyone that doesn't want to buy the book. So check it out. If you want to work together, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Cool.
This was incredible.
Thank you. Likewise. So fun.
Yeah. And we didn't pay her, if anyone's wondering, to say those things
say
about us
anything
being
like that.
nice.
That's right.
No, this is my affiliate link. No.
Thanks, Yasmeen.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
And now the post pod with V and Marc.
I swear we didn't pay her to say anything.
No, not at all.
Post-pod!
Oh!
That came out of nowhere. That's a zinger.
Honestly, this is the most fun that I have on this whole podcast. It's just, I don't know, trying to make each other laugh. It works all the time.
It works all the time, yeah.
Where do we start with Yasmeen?
Well, it's funny because like I go into many of these conversations with our guests with trying to, approach it without being influenced with my own ideas, and
for sure
thoughts on topics, right? And I have to admit, going into this conversation, I struggled with the delineation or the difference between, say, a product marketer and maybe a more traditional marketer in the context, even though there's still a lot of like, I can still see some similarities there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think she did a good job really showcasing the differences and some of the struggles a product marketer may have in their day-to-day versus someone that's maybe just working in marketing, even in a consumer setting too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it can't be easy trying to navigate all the nuances, all the product rollouts, especially if, again, assuming this is like a product that is constantly changing its feature sets, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is a unique skill set that you have to navigate, and where you have to work really, really, really close with the product managers to try to bring to life, in the best case scenario, the product itself that you're trying to service. So I think there are nuances now, or at least I can see them a lot clearer than I probably did going into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, first of all, I love chatting with her. She's super fun.
She was great.
Yeah. And I really like the framework that she has: market validation, framing the message, delivering the message. It's kind of a simplified version of, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just simplified version of that marketing land thing that we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But it's a similar process in the similar discipline. And I that's what I like about it. Well, it is almost the same process, but so I like that because the discipline, and she talked about this too, like where she's getting sign off on her steps. Like, you don't want to skip to just running ads before you understand the product. like that's a good idea, or understand the customer needs. And so like following the order of market validation, framing the message, delivering the message. There's instances, especially like the one you brought up, where you have an existing product that's already in the market, and you're having to fly the plane while you're fixing it. You still have to have an order, a sequence. Like you might need to keep things running, but you need this other system running in the background, which is do the market validation, frame the message, deliver the message, if you're going to improve or change anything.
Yeah. I think, at the end of the day, when I wonder, is product marketing the truest form of marketing? Hear me out here in the context that, you're working with, wait a second.
You saw my face.
I saw your face. It went like, you're trying to develop a communication strategy, if you will, for a product that is either just being launched or it's kind of at the beginning. So you're leaning heavily into a lot of the customer research, right? Mm-hmm. And it should likely inform much of your decision making over the course of, I don't know, the iterations of your product. I don't know if that 2-3 years or whatever it is. I would venture to assume here, and I don't have the data to back this up, the reason why product marketers is maybe the truest form of marketing is because you're working a lot closer with what the consumer is telling you that needs. You're working with product development at the same time to try to bring those features to life. Then you're trying to think about a more, a communication strategy to make sure now you can amplify that feature set across a target audience. So I feel like you're taking real time, maybe not real time, that's the wrong word. You're taking signals from the market. It's basically looking at the product, evolving the product at the same time, versus more established organizations where it's almost like on cruise control a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's more about then just building the awareness of the product suite, potentially, like insert here Salesforce, where it's just talking about Salesforce versus then all the different unique products. So that's kind of where I was going with, being a true marketer in the context that you're really working with the data and you're trying to inform product at the same time.
I get your point. I think my head, as you were saying that, was thinking about the role of the product marketer that we were talking about. Well, we talked about this with Yasmeen just now about market research and who you're asking for research from, and understanding their context of where that information is coming from.
Yeah.
So let's say in our case, we're doing market research on product marketing.
Yeah.
So Yasmeen is our market research person that we're reaching out to, our marketer that we're researching, essentially.
Yeah.
So in the context of where she's coming from and the way she's positioning project or product marketing, to me is very heavily invested on the startup side of product marketing. And so the way I interpret what you were saying about the purest form of marketing might be product marketing. In some ways, I believe that to be true because you're bringing a new product to market. Is that kind of where you're going with that? Like, am I interpreting that right?
Yeah. Because the influence, like you have to get so many things right. Mm-hmm. If you think about any product that comes to market, for it to actually succeed over the course of, 3, 5, 10 years or whatever it is, there's so many things that need to happen for it to be successful.
Sure.
It has to be something that differentiates. We talked about being different or differentiating. We talked about, is there a void in the market? How is the consumer perceiving that void? What should be done? The message that you eventually go out to market with, can people, resonate with it or relate to that?
Yeah.
How can you become distinct? So then becoming memorable and build those mental structures, like all those things need to happen for a product essentially to stand the test of time, essentially. So when you're bringing a product to life for the first time, there's a lot of things there's no history you can work with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I on that front, I think you're forced to follow that discipline of market validation, framing the message and delivering the message. Whereas Whereas an established company, like you brought up Salesforce, or pick any established company like Microsoft, Amazon, whatever. Like
Apple.
you just
Yeah,
need
yeah.
to reiterate the thing to your point that Salesforce is for sales management pipeline, or maybe I'm missing the positioning a little bit, but it's
Exactly.
like, and then they throw in things like
Yeah,
Slack
yeah.
and all those other things that are just elements of that, or like all the other tools and features and benefits. But the main messaging is really around like our name and who it's for and the problem we solve.
Exactly.
But they've established that already. And so they know it's the fit, right? Because they have thousands and thousands of customers that are using it for that exact reason. So
Exactly.
in a startup, you don't have that history. And so you're trying to find it. You're trying to find that fit with the product, but also with the messaging and the way that it's the visualizations and the communications and all that stuff. The pitch decks, everything is website, all of that is part of
everything.
Mm-hmm. So you have to do that because it didn't exist before. So in a sense, I agree with you. Like you are forced to be a true marketer, because big M marketer, not just small M marketer that just runs ads.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, she made this point. It's not trying to find the quickest way to go and put ads out there.
Right.
Ads is like essentially the byproduct of everything else, the foundation that you've laid. It's not the first thing you should be thinking about. And I would venture to, and I wish we had more time with her, but I would venture to guess that a lot of executives and senior individuals or senior thought leaders in an organization may think, well, just put an ad out talking about this feature, and that's all you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to that point, it's have we done the right research? Mm-hmm. Have we surveyed the right individuals? Do we have the right signals to suggest that, yes, this is the feature we should be working on?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a fascinating space when I think about it. I've never had the opportunity to work at a startup, so I don't know from firsthand, but just, speaking with other individuals and even Yasmeen's insights today, it calls for a very, very, you have to be very thick-skinned, I think, to take on a role like that from a product marketing perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's differences, but same, but different in some ways, though, in that, like you and I both worked for an established company, Sport Check, trying to promote everything under the sun. And then you have different, rather than say the product manager who's got a new feature, we had, let's just say, a footwear VP that's got a new shoe that's got to drop. And so there's thousands of new shoes every week, right? so there's different but same in the sense that there's all these new things that are always happening in a business of any size. Yeah. And so trying to coordinate and collaborate with, it's different people with maybe different titles, but I think there's still a lot of similarities there.
Of course.
You know what I mean? The one thing I thought was interesting that, a whole bunch of things where I thought were interesting, but just the coordination of all those people together. Yeah. I had this flashback I always have this flashback of Moneyball, the movie. Book, movie, whatever. But there's that scene where like they're doing terribly. They've already like put the team together. They brought them in for specific reasons, but they never told them why they were there.
Nobody told them to.
Right. So they're all these guys that are stepping on the field trying to be heroes and, individually. And it wasn't until they were like, oh, fuck, we're losing. We need to do something different. They're like, maybe we should talk to them. And then they set clear expectations of, okay, I forget all the names of the players and whatnot, but like, we brought you on because you get a lot of RBIs. You get guys on base. That's all we need you to do, because that will generate, the opportunities for scoring. And then when we have this guy who's like the heavy hitter, he'll knock them all in. We can score. So like nobody had to do more than what they were supposed to do. They just didn't know what they were supposed to do and how they were going to work together as a team. So I think
totally
that always is a flashback to me in terms of like managing teams of teams toward a common goal and making sure that everybody's aware of that common goal and their role in it.
And she talked about, like Yasmeen talked about, the communication And sometimes not only the lack, I didn't expect this. I was genuine in that, because a lot of these organizations, they're not very large. So you would just assume that there's really strong communication, there's strong direction and whatnot. But I'm sure, just like every other organization, it will at some point suffer from some level of silos, some level of miscommunication, or not clear direction or vision. And that creates sometimes this, going back to your analogy, it's like, why are we here? What is it that exactly that you need me to do today, so to speak? And
Yeah.
the prioritization exercise, I think, is also something that, she was very, very thorough on, or at least it seems like she's very thorough on, to say, like, it's not just doing customer research, it's about understanding churn, it's about understanding all these elements. So then by documenting that and saying, here's all the steps or all the things I need to do under customer research. So no, you can't have this next week. Like, it's like,
Totally.
And I think that's so important, that you kind of make sure that you're creating that safe distance that you need to actually operate and bring to life a product into the market.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to the context of where that was coming from, I know she's a consultant. And so as a consultant, scope creep is really problematic.
Dangerous.
But that's also true for employees, full-time employees. And I think in some way, I think it's such a beautiful example in that, we should also be managing our own day-to-day, even as a full-time employee, like
totally
a consultant, being protective of our time because we're being asked to do something specific. And then if all of a sudden you're just responding to the fires every day, then you can't actually deliver on the thing that you were originally brought on to do. And that's just not a happy situation for anyone.
It's funny because every time, she mentioned that a couple of times, and my mind went back to one of our old bosses, where it's like real-time, right-time marketing. I'm like, where are you today? Where, it's like, if you're constantly reacting, that means that there's generally, you don't have a strong enough direction yourself. Right? You're just waiting for the market to dictate. Well, I do appreciate that you do need to be somewhat flexible and malleable, if you will. But I think just reacting, and I've been in those settings, and it burns teams out. It burns people out, because it's going back to, well, who are we? What do we stand for? And why aren't we forcing others to change to what we do? Right. And it's like, how do we position ourselves? And that's where, again, it goes back onto the shoulders of the marketers, because it's our responsibility to kind of build out that space for us in a market where we can say, you know what, I don't need to respond to that pricing action because my brand's strong enough. There is already awareness that we have A, B, C, D, E. So I'm not going to conform to that in this moment. Yeah. It's a huge responsibility, though.
Totally. We should do a thing on real-time advertising or real-time marketing, because we both lived that for a while.
We did.
One thing, though, I did want to touch on, again, the same but different idea. Like, she talked about product marketers being mid to lower funnel, and the brand marketers being more top of mind awareness, upper funnel. So
performance marketer.
Yeah, like short, long performance versus brand, like
totally.
Yeah. And so that sense, like, there is a lot of overlap. I can appreciate, and to your point, the scope of the product marketer is defined in the context of the conversation, defined by launching a new product and bringing it to life. And in that scenario, there's already, 5% of the market is shopping today for the thing that you have to offer, most likely. So you don't really need, in the short term, like being a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the number is, you probably don't need to do any brand marketing because there's enough low-hanging fruit that you can steal it.
Yep.
But once you hit a certain threshold, revenue threshold, whatever, client threshold, whatever that thing is, then you need to do brand marketing because you'll just run out of the low-hanging fruit.
It goes back to my apple tree analogy, man.
I totally was just thinking of the apple tree.
The low-hanging fruit, it's always there. And it's like, it goes back to, if you think about, we did a whole podcast on intent-based marketing, right?
Yeah.
the low hanging fruit, that's where people are naturally showing the intent's already there. You're just picking up the fruit off of the ground. But at some point, the fruit's going to stop falling to the ground if you're not like watering, fertilizing the soil, and allowing that tree to grow whatever fruit it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where you get in, you can live off of it for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it in the context of a startup. Yeah, you can only get so far where you're just bidding on your own
Mm-hmm.
keywords and doing some light organic. At some point, like bidding on your own keywords is not a good enough strategy.
No, not at all. Maybe never.
Maybe never, actually. Yeah.
The other one that's, I would say, same but different is the depth of product knowledge. I think that's super important, and that probably should be one of the first things that a marketer does, because you have to be able to explain it to your mom. I love that analogy. And
I think that's a great example.
And maybe not even your mom. Maybe it's your grandma. Like,
maybe,
if your mom still thinks that Bitcoin's too confusing, like the way you did.
Yeah.
So you might need to level down. Or your 3-year-old or whatever, because it's really like the attention span that people have for stuff that isn't an active pain point is really low.
Right. Yeah.
So the depth of product knowledge, I agree with her. That's really important. As a brand marketer for an established company, you probably don't need to have a great depth of brand knowledge, but for sure, if you're a product marketer that's launching a product and bringing it to life, you definitely need a deep understanding and connect that to the customer pain points that she was talking about. The part that I thought was same was different, and I just thought of it now, was that I think Ogilvy, one of his books, I have it here somewhere, talked about like you should be using all of your customers' products and spending a lot of your time doing research on your customers' products as a consultant, because you need to understand it better than anybody else so that you can explain it.
Yeah.
So he came at it from a different era entirely than Yasmeen is doing it. But I still think so that's why I'm saying same but different. I do think probably a good lesson for any marketer, whether you're a product marketer or not, is to spend a bit of time learning about the product.
A little bit, probably a lot. I'm with you on that. And even when you're going into an established, say, organization that's already have some level of foundation, that means that you're spending even more time to understand the history that's already been created there. And I know we talked about that in a different context, if you will, in a couple of podcasts ago, but it's more important to understand the product and then how your competitors are measuring up against that as well, because that will not only inform how you're looking and bringing the product to market and differentiate yourself, but it will likely help you navigate a lot of the internal, I don't want to call it politics, but some of the difficulties that sometimes internally marketers will consistently face, because organizations naturally believe that we are on the peripheral versus like really being on the inside to help build elements of the business. So yeah, totally. Anyway, that was awesome. I'm super glad that we got to have her on. Yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah,
it was great.
She's really fun and smart and articulate and all those things. So it was great to have her share all her thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Yasmeen. If you're listening, it was great to have you. And I think more importantly, I think our listeners are going to enjoy this episode. It's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, so we've had pricing now. We've had product. We've talked about promotion a lot. Place we haven't talked about.
Are you foreshadowing?
Maybe. Maybe a little bit with e-com.
Maybe.
As place.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm totally foreshadowing. There's something coming up.
There is something coming up.
But you're going to have to wait. Not you, V.
Yeah.
You are our audience listener. To the spring or fall, because we're taking August off.
We're stepping away from the mics for a month.
It's going to be great.
It's going to be nice.
It's going to be really lovely.
Congratulations, by the way, on completing your MBA.
And to you on completing yours.
Virtual high fives. Fantastico.
Okay, buddy. Well,
all right, man.
It's good to chat again. Yeah, thanks. We'll do this again for sure.
We'll do this again. Have a good one, man.
Adieu.
Bye.
Bye. Before you go, we'd love a review. If you've got a chance to take a minute or two and leave us a review, give us some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. We really want to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that. Thank you.